The Kremlin says that no compromises were reached in talks with the U.S. delegation aimed at moving closer to ending the war in Ukraine. U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Donald Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner presented a revised version of a 28-point peace plan that had been criticized for being too closely aligned to Russia's war goals. Ukraine requested the revisions and tentatively backed the new draft. Ahead of the meeting, the Russian leader rejected what he said were European demands, and he warned European leaders that Russia was ready for war if that's what they wanted.
They're on the side of the war. Even when they try to supposedly introduce some changes to Trump's proposal, we see clearly what they're doing. All these changes are aimed at only one thing: to completely block the entire peace process by putting forward demands that are absolutely unacceptable to Russia. They understand this. By doing so, they then intend to blame Russia for the collapse of this peace process. That's their goal. We see this clearly.
And let's talk about this with DW's Nick Connolly in Kyiv and with former Moscow bureau chief Yuri Ushakov, who joins us from Riga, as DW is banned from reporting in Russia. Welcome to both of you. Yuri, let me begin with you. Initial statements from Moscow are rather cautious after this meeting. Is it a sign that the Russians are not satisfied with the outcome?
Well, to me, Sarah, this mostly shows that the Russians are not happy with the U.S. proposals or the tweaks Ukraine made to Trump's so-called peace plan, not to mention the European demands, which Putin seems to completely ignore right now. My impression is that Moscow is already pleased with how the talks went, because they walked in with maximum demands and 5 hours later didn't budge an inch. Putin's advisor, Yuri Ushakov, summed it up after the meeting like this.
The conversation was very useful, constructive, and highly substantive, and it lasted not for 5 minutes, but for 5 hours. This allowed us to thoroughly discuss the prospects for further joint efforts aimed at achieving a long-term peaceful solution of the Ukrainian crisis.
Those are just the usual diplomatic platitudes. What I take from that is that this most likely wasn't about a ceasefire for Ukraine at all. For Russia, 2 points matter most: getting Donbas and making sure Ukraine never joins NATO.
Of course, the meeting between Witkoff and Putin was closely watched in Ukraine. And Nick, I'd like to ask you, what has the reaction been in Kyiv?
I think if you talk to analysts here watching that meeting, they will say, "I told you so." This was a further indication that Russia is not going to budge, that Russia basically will only accept full capitulation from Ukraine. Some kind of deal where Ukraine's effective sovereignty is maintained is not something they're going to sign up to. And it does feel in all of this like the outside world is a lot more optimistic, or at least trying to be optimistic about these talks and their chances, than either Ukraine or Russia. Both sides not particularly convinced that peace is that close, even though maybe in public you'll have President Zelensky talking about the chances and Donald Trump's diplomatic efforts. He has to do that. He has to be seen to be engaging and to be open to what the White House wants him to do. But I think if you look at the substance, both of the sides a lot further away from any kind of resolution than people in Europe, let alone in the White House, would want to believe.
And Yuri, I mean, this is, we have to say, it's not the first meeting between the real estate investor Witkoff and Putin, but for Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, it was the first. And it was, you know, the chatter ahead of it was that economic interests might be at the forefront of these talks, but indeed, that was not the case. What's your take on what was actually discussed?
Well, first of all, let's not forget, sitting at the table weren't just politicians and diplomats. There were 3 businessmen, Jared Kushner, Witkoff, and Putin's negotiator. So for Russia, ending the war isn't just about peace. It's a chance to restart economic cooperation with the US. But for that to happen, sanctions need to be eased or scrapped altogether. There are already reports that some American companies are making plans to work with Russia's energy giants in places like the Arctic once the war is over. Interestingly, Ukraine is doing the same or similar, negotiating major deals with the US. That was actually Trump's idea, having US companies involved in developing Ukraine's natural resources as a kind of security guarantees. Russia, on the other hand, wants to use its own resources to pull the US closer. So I'm pretty sure that was part of the talks too, maybe not dominant, but still an issue.
And Yuri, we heard Putin in a soundbite warning European leaders that Russia was ready for war if that's what they wanted. Why did Putin make such a statement at that moment in particular?
I think Putin basically wanted to show who is boss, and he did. He kept Kushner and Witkoff waiting for 3 hours, which is classic Putin, I would say. We've seen these power plays for 25 years. While they waited, the Americans got a tour of Moscow city center, all decked out for Christmas. That's another well-known trick, impressed the guest before the real show. Then came the 5-hour meeting, which was probably more like a history lecture from Putin to a New York real estate investor and the US president's son-in-law. Nothing new there either. But what really stood out, Sarah, was the threat he made in response to the growing attacks on Russia's energy infrastructure. The context is important. Oil terminals in Novorossiysk, tankers on the Black Sea. Just yesterday, another Russian tanker was hit. These strikes are clearly damaging Russia's energy sector and ultimately targeting Putin's war chest.
Nick, what are the options for Ukraine now after this meeting?
I think they have to be seen to be engaging, carrying on, playing that game with Trump. I think people are not very optimistic. They've seen before that basically Trump comes in with a Russian plan, tries to bully Ukraine into signing on the dotted line, and then with the help of the Europeans, some of that is then revised. I think they're going to carry on fighting on land, and as Yuri mentioned there, at sea. I think those recent Ukrainian attacks on Russian oil tankers on the Shadow Fleet, that is the main thing, bringing in cash to Putin's regime. That is very painful for them. And it is a response to Russia's attacks on Ukraine's energy. On Ukraine recently was trying to import liquefied gas with the Turkish ship that was attacked on the Danube, on a port there by Russia. So this is what Ukraine says, we're going to do the same to you and make sure that you run out of money, in the hope that eventually that leads to Russia being more amenable to some kind of deal, running out of resources to carry on the invasion here on land. So I think there's going to be more of all of this. I don't think there's going to be any, turning down of the dial on this. And I think from Ukraine's perspective, this proves that these attacks on Russian shipping really work.
DW's Nick Connolly in Kyiv and Yuri Ushakov in Riga. Thank you to both of you. Now, as Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine approaches its 4th anniversary this winter, both sides are absorbing heavy losses. DW News visited a Ukrainian couple, both surgeons, who are volunteering their skills to treat the war wounded. They've even had to operate on their own family members.
Trauma patients, consultations, operations, helping Ukrainian soldiers get back on their feet. This has been life for Oksana and Stanislav for 4 years now. Stanislav works with large bone injuries.
This man is missing a piece of bone, so we operated on him. We rebuilt the bone here and put in a device, and now we are lowering the bone, millimeter by millimeter every day, until it connects with the native bone. As long as we turn it millimeter by millimeter, new bone will grow in this place.
Resources are scarce. What the doctors can't get from the state, they seek from private foundations, including international ones. Sometimes they also manage to operate at the private clinic where they work, providing free consultations to wounded soldiers.
Traditionally, 85% of the wounded return to service after their injuries. We rehabilitate them well and to a high standard. In other words, by keeping personnel combat ready, we are strengthening our country. And this actually takes up the vast majority of our time. And the rest of the time, we work as civilian doctors to earn money.
When Russia's full-scale invasion began in February 2022, the couple managed to leave Bucha for Kyiv with their children. The following month, Oksana's parents tried to leave occupied Bucha. However, their car was shot at by Russian soldiers. Oksana's mother died on the spot, and her father was wounded. Volunteers helped him out from a shed where he was hiding.
They told him where to go, and he went through the gardens because there were cars driving and shooting on the roads. He climbed, then fell, and after 2 or 3 houses, there was a paramedic and an ambulance driver there. And when he left, we just froze. I sat there just staring at the phone, and 40 minutes later, he called, "I'm out." He walked through the checkpoints, and there were situations where he could have died, but luckily he made it.
In Kyiv, Oksana operated on her father herself.
His right arm was shot through and his head was injured. And then his life depended on me, on you, for a very long time.
In honor of her mother, Oksana founded a charitable initiative and later a foundation that helps displaced persons and military personnel. The couple says they don't plan to stop as long as there is a need for their help.